Penguin Random House Audio presents Mrs. Christie at the Mystery Guild Library by Amanda Chapman. Read for you by Patti Murin. For my grandmother. What a very extraordinary person you are. What sort of a woman are you? Why are you talking like this? Who are you? Clotilde Bradbury Scott to Miss Jane Marple, Nemesis. Prologue.
Do you know, when I was a child, it was the lavatory to which I retired for quiet meditation.
I froze. The voice behind me, British and unmistakably posh, had come out of nowhere. But this was impossible. There had been no one in the library when I'd locked up, and surely no one upstairs in the Christie Room when I'd hurried in, grabbed my book from its shelf, kicked off my shoes, and thrown myself full length on the nice, cozy couch for a little me time.
I would close the heavy mahogany shelf-like cover and sit on it.
The voice, high and fluting, slightly breathless, continued,
giving myself up to reflection. I think Mr. Wright catches that sense of retreat rather well.
When this remarkable statement had concluded, I sat up, carefully closed the volume I'd been perusing, which, yes, just happened to be Lawrence Wright's charming, Clean and Decent, The Fascinating History of the Bathroom and the Water Closet, and turned my head toward the speaker. It was a woman sitting a bit behind me and to my left in the alcove of the Mystery Guild Library's Agatha Christie Room, entirely at home on its gold velvet-upholstered armchair. I supposed that I must have missed her in my beeline for the couch, though there was something about her that was, well, unmissable. Not to look at, exactly. She was fairly unremarkable in appearance and could have been any one of the interchangeable New York matriarchs who so generously fund the library. A woman of late middle age with what might be described as an interesting face, a mouth that looked quick to smile, and a long nose below heavy-lidded eyes that nonetheless sparked with humor. A hat like a deflated velvet souffle was perched on her waved gray hair, and sensible, well-polished brogues encased her feet. She was wearing the kind of boxy tweed suit that had gone out of favor at least 3/4 of a century ago, though the cut and the material told me it was bespoke. On the floor next to her, waiting like a patient puppy, was a black patent leather handbag that I immediately pegged as by Lawner, handbag makers to the late Queen Elizabeth II. Also, I was quite sure the 5 strands of pearls around the woman's neck were the real deal. My guest looked familiar. Was she one of the library's patrons? Someone I'd met only briefly? But those eyes, from which shone an unmistakable intelligence, also held a hint of mischief, and I had never sensed even a glimmer of wit in any of those pillars of our institution. This woman was different. She had real presence. There was something, well, irresistible about her. Not that I didn't try to resist. She might well be contemplating a nice fat donation to the library, but that didn't mean she could make herself at home after hours in the Christie Room. I stood, and using my sternest, "I am the librarian," which I am not, tone of voice, said, "I'm very sorry, but the library is closed for the day."
"Lovely,"
my visitor responded, waving one beringed hand gaily.
"I've always been a bit shy, especially when I'm on the lam, so to speak."
Oh, good Lord, I thought. The woman's made a break from whatever loony bin her family has convinced her is just a rest home. Probably the same one where my great-aunt Doris, who has frequent spells where she imagines herself to be a goldfish, sometimes rests. "I'm leaving now myself," I lied. "But I'm happy to walk you out, Mrs.
"Mallowan,"
the woman replied,
Mrs. Max Mallowan. I froze again. Mrs. Max Mallowan. Although you probably know me as Agatha Christie.
Chapter 1. Do you think it might be beyond the realms of possibility that I might get a drink? Mr. Venables, the Pale Horse. My name is Tory Van Dyne. I am a book conservator at New York's Mystery Guild Library, and until that rainy late September evening when a woman claiming to be the queen of crime first materialized in the library's Christie Room, I had been working very hard at living a safe, sane, sensible life. A life shielded from the eccentricities of my old New York family, including a grandfather given to penning naughty limericks and the aforementioned great-aunt, the antics of my socialite/actor, cousin Nicola, popularly known as one of the three belles of Broadway, and my own particular brand of crazy, about which I'd always felt the least said the better. I lived instead a quiet life, a safe, sane, sensible life. Later, when I'd had a chance to process our little encounter, I realized it made a kind of weird sense that if my guest was indeed Agatha Christie, which I did not believe for a minute, and if she had indeed decided to visit New York City some 50 years after she'd been airlifted to the great beyond, which I also did not believe for a minute, she might indeed choose New York's Mystery Guild Library as a home base. Even in the afterlife, she would surely have heard about the library's Agatha Christie Room, a very close replica of British mystery novelist Agatha Christie's personal library in Greenway House, her holiday home in Devon, England. The Christie Room had been a labor of love masterminded by my grandmother, Margaret Jane Van Dyne, in what was at the time her home on Washington Square North, and which now houses the Mystery Guild Library on the first 2 floors, and yours truly on the 2 floors above. The house is one of the dozen or so remaining Greek Revival red brick, marble-trimmed townhouses in what is known as the Row, overlooking Greenwich Village's Washington Square Park. And it is still as covetable an address as it was in 1880, when Henry James limned the life of the wealthy in his masterpiece, Washington Square. I had always loved the park. It is small, no more than a few square city blocks, and I loved its intimacy, its shaded benches, its great round fountain in the central plaza. And like all good New Yorkers, I loved its monumental Washington Arch, the park's official entrance at the foot of Fifth Avenue. Grandmother's house on Washington Square North was a mere half block to the west of Fifth, and from my tiny Juliet balcony on the 3rd floor, I had enviable views across to the park and the arch. Grandmother, one of the last of the New York Montagues, railroads and coal, had brought the house to her marriage to Tyler Anson Van Dyne, finance and real estate, in 1947. But Margaret Jane had been a smart cookie. She knew whom and what she was marrying. A Van Dyne, yes, but a devil with women and a damn fool with money. And so she had held on to her girlhood home as her plan B, leasing it at an exorbitant rent to the right sort of people, by which she meant her sort of people. Her foresight paid off. When my grandfather finally chased one extramarital skirt too many, she'd shocked her social circle by divorcing him. I could overlook it in his younger days, Grandmother had sniffed, but in a man of 60, what had been merely a failing now began to look like bad taste. She'd then given her bewildered tenants exactly 30 days to remove themselves from her house, and betook herself from the Van Dyne mansion on Upper Fifth Avenue all the way downtown to Washington Square. There she lived quite happily with her extensive collection of Agatha Christie first editions, spending the last 20 years of her life absorbed in recreating as closely as possible Mrs. Christie's library at Green.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?